I'd like to thank Brilliant for sponsoring this video.
Hi, welcome to Astro Journey UK. In today's video I'm going to be talking about why I jumped from APT, Astro Photography Tool, to the ASIAIR and why I've never looked back. So if you're interested in hearing this story, then keep watching. So I was watching a video on Astro Soundscapes channel, a video by Ollie, where he was talking about is there a best version of astrophotography image capturing software and things like that. He was talking a little bit about ASIAIR and Nina, but it could be sort of a comparison between any type of astrophotography imaging tools, and this particular video will be covering the ASIAIR and my experiences with APT as well. The main point about the video, which is a very valid point, is there is no best answer to this particular question of what's the best software to use. It completely depends on the individual's approaches to astrophotography, the type of astrophotography they're doing, the equipment that they've got. So that was very valid, but what I wanted to talk about is mainly why I've moved from APT onto the ASIAIR platform, and yeah, definitely never regretted that as a decision. So I'm going to split this video into 4 sections. I'm going to be talking about my past experiences with APT. I'm then going to be talking about what made me jump to the ASIAIR device itself, and then the final 2 sections are going to be looking at the pros and cons of the ASIAIR, trying to be as objective as possible with it, but disclaimer, I am really impressed with the ASIAIR device on the whole, so there might be a slight little bit of bias there, but it's worth watching. There are some useful bits of information in there, so yeah, it's worth working all the way through the video. So I first started this hobby back in 2020. No astrophotography experience in any way, shape or form. I did used to do quite a bit of landscape photography, so I had a digital SLR, had a collection of lenses, and fell into astrophotography from that kind of perspective. Initially I started off just taking images literally of star fields and things like that, and just being impressed with how many stars the camera could capture, but very quickly sort of realised that I would need an equatorial mount. And I went out and bought a Skywatcher Star Adventurer Pro mount, which was fantastic. Everything's all still self-controlled. There's no need for imaging computers and loads of other bits and pieces. So the kit was fairly simple by that point. Fast forward to the end of 2020, and then I went out and bought a second-hand Skywatcher 200p Newtonian telescope. That came with an EQ5 Pro mount, which I subsequently found out that was underpowered from an astrophotography perspective for that scope. However, got into that, put the digital SLR on it, but actually sort of realised that I wanted to make the jump as well a few months later in getting a dedicated astrophotography camera. So I went out and went all out, bought the ASI 1600mm Pro camera, bought a set of filters, an electronic filter wheel, also bought a 120mm mini guide camera, screwed that onto the guide scope or the finder scope that came with the telescope itself, and started sort of working through imaging. So back then I had an old MacBook that I could put Windows on. Windows being one of the challenges that you have in this hobby. Almost all of the software, although some of that's changing now, almost all of the software seems to be very Windows focused. So if you want to stack images, Deep Sky Stacker is definitely a very good go-to piece of software, but it's Windows only. And then the same thing with at the time sort of APT, which was a piece of software that I saw Astro Backyard using, so I thought, well, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. So put that onto the machine, started using it, and yeah, fundamentally came across some really challenging issues in terms of just getting things like plate solving to work, and there'd be various different plugins where you'd have to use that and select which one that you wanted. Did you want to do blind plate solving? Did you want to do this? Did you want to do that? And the capability was all there, but I think it's really just how it was presented, and for my experiences anyway, the lack of it working first time, but also the lack of it working every time. That was a little bit of a frustration. So I would spend quite a few of my rare dark clear skies trying to work out and diagnose problems with things like that. So that was a particular problem. It's a minor issue at the end of the day. Another issue was around sort of installing drivers, so putting ASCOM on there, putting the ASCOM drivers for the cameras and the mount and all of those sorts of things. Positive side of these drivers is the fact that yes, if something is ASCOM compatible, then it's going to work with all of these imaging software, so whether that's APT, Nina, SharpCap, etc. So that's a really nice piece of consistency that's been implemented by sort of astrophotography vendors, the mounts, the cameras, filter wheels and all of those sorts of things, which is really nice to make sure it's definitely going to work for you. So that's a plus point with when you're actually having to install these things onto a Windows machine, for example. So the other thing that comes with those ASCOM drivers and that sort of global compatibility is tools like APT. You can use a camera like a digital SLR, so that could be Sony, Nikon, Canon, but also you can use pretty much any dedicated astrophotography camera. So that could be a ZWO camera, it could be an ASIAIR camera, it could be an Explore Scientific camera, and there's a ton of others as well. So you've got a very wide range of compatibility. Other features and functionality that you get with some dedicated imaging software is that you can also sort of do things like controlling roll on and roll off roofs and things like that. Not particularly a problem for me because I can't have an observatory anywhere because of trees. I have to move around the garden when I'm imaging, but that's a bit of a side point. So yeah, my setup was a relatively straightforward one. It happened to be all ZWO cameras. It happened to be a mount which worked with the ASIAIR, which I'll get onto in a minute. But at the end of the day, yeah, APT was doing everything for me that I would need it to do, although it just had some usability issues, I would say. So potentially my negative aspects of APT might not be the same if I was using Nina or SharpCap, for example. So it's definitely still worth looking at those two bits of software. One major issue that I did have with APT, and it again, it's probably a user error thing. I could never get automatic meridian flips to actually work. I thought I'd set everything up correctly. I thought I'd set up the sort of the minimum and maximum in terms of where it needs to then stop slewing and wait until it then sort of does the flip, etc. But it literally just never worked for me. I know it works for tons of other people, but it didn't work for me. And that all of the tweaking and playing about with things probably were making it worse, but I just couldn't get it to work. So that was a real pity. It did actually mean that whenever I was doing imaging, I would have to fundamentally do that meridian flip manually, which, yeah, stops me from being able to do other things whilst I'm actually doing the imaging. One final disclaimer before I move on to the next part of this video was, yeah, all of my experiences have been with APT, and this was back in 2020. I've not tried the software since. It might have improved, they might have changed the issues that I was having purely from a usability perspective. So again, there's a bit of a disclaimer there. My opinions and views on APT are a few years old, so take that to a degree with a pinch of salt.
Are you ready to ignite your passion for learning and exploring the world of maths, science and beyond? Well, I was, and I did that at Brilliant.org. With Brilliant.org, you'll find over 80 interactive courses covering a wide range of topics from foundational math and logic to advanced computer science and cutting-edge physics. What sets Brilliant apart? It's all about active problem-based learning. You'll dive into real-world challenges and puzzles, building your critical thinking and problem-solving skills, one fun and engaging step at a time. So why wait? Unlock your potential and join millions of learners at Brilliant.org today. You can get a free 30-day trial today by heading to brilliant.org/AstroJourneyUK, and the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual subscription.
So I was using APT probably until about sort of mid-2021, and that's when I jumped ship and purchased an ASIAIR Pro device. I must admit, my first impressions of the device were pretty fantastic. I was just blown away by the capabilities of the device, the convenience of the device, and just the fact that everything worked. Yeah, I sort of plugged all of my kit in using exactly the same kit, so the same mount, the same telescope, the same cameras and everything. Plugged that all in and everything worked. So any kind of plate solving, straight to where it needed to go to. If it was, I was doing polar alignment, again, that was dead easy. I didn't need any additional equipment. Didn't have to bend down looking through the polar scope or anything like that. I could just use the main scope, the main imaging camera, do polar alignment, it was definitely good enough, and it still is good enough in terms of getting sort of midway between sub 1 arc second in terms of RMS error, typically around 0.5. So definitely a capable polar scope, or sorry, polar alignment routine there. Yeah, it just fundamentally worked for me. There's definitely always the grumble that everybody knows about, which the old Pro device, the Wi-Fi was literally horrendous. You could literally be stood right next to the device and the Wi-Fi signal could drop out, which was a little bit irritating. The only time that would be irritating is when you're actually planning and using the device and looking at the images and things. But once you set up a plan to do your imaging, you don't need that kind of connectivity. You can just go away and leave it and come back in the morning when it's done. So I'll say about the fact that things just works, and I talked about sort of the auto meridian flip not working for me within the APT EQ mod setup that I had on my laptop before. The first time that I used the ASIAIR device, as I say, I plugged everything in and I was probably imaging. It would have been something in the summer sky by that point. I was doing the imaging and getting ready to sort of need to do a meridian flip, but I'd already sort of pre-checked the box that said auto meridian flip, and it came up to the point, it was passing meridian, it stopped slewing, waited 5 minutes, automatically flipped, and then carried on imaging. And I was like, this is fantastic, this is exactly how it should be. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've got out of all of this, is the simplicity of the ASIAIR, ease of use, and just the fact that it just works. And I think that's the strongest sell at the end of the day for ZWO, is if you're new to astrophotography and you want things just to work and you want to just focus on the ability to be able to capture the night sky and then go through all of the fun and games with post-processing, then it's got your back there. It's just going to actually work. It's just going to allow you to benefit from those clear nights, rather than having to diagnose and work through what the problems are with things. So yeah, definitely usability is high up on the plus list in my opinion. So I'm going to talk about the pros of the ASIAIR now. So the first point is it does everything I need. It supports deep sky astrophotography, allows me to do some planetary photography, some lunar, some solar, all of those features are supported, but it's also got loads of other capabilities around that. So there's a Sky Atlas feature to be able to frame up and support my image planning. I've got the capabilities to be able to do frame rotation and image composition and things like that, as well as the actual image planning itself, polar alignment, calibration, frame, taking, and all of that capability. So I think it's got a very good feature set. So a great thing about the ASIAIR is there are regular updates. The way that these updates work is your phone or your tablet will have the app installed on it, and when the app updates, then along with that app will be the firmware for the ASIAIR itself, and that app updates as well. So when you open up the app, it will then sort of prompt you and say the firmware and the device is out of date. You tap the button to say, yep, update it, goes away and does it. Nice and easy to use, never had it fail on me. And you then get the latest version of the software. So the ASIAIR device is portable and compact. Here it is. It's pretty small, nice and lightweight, and you can put it in your equipment bag if you're doing some astrophotography away from home, and you won't notice that extra weight and be able to sort of squeeze it into a bag, because it's pretty small and you can just throw it in with the rest of your kit. The biggest plus point from my perspective, I would say, is the user friendliness and the ease of use of the ASIAIR. The software is just so intuitive. I mean, I've been using it since midway through 2021, and I've never looked at the manual. I've never needed to look at the manual. Even when you get new features that get released and you kind of look at it and go, okay, that's a field rotation sort of composition planning part of the Sky Atlas. You just tap a few buttons and you go, oh, okay, it works like that, and you go away and just use it. You don't have to consult any manuals. You don't really have to go online to understand it. So I think, yeah, they've done really, really good job in making the software very easy to use and open to beginners in this hobby as well. Just on that beginner point as well, Because it is so easy to use, you don't need to worry about, well, okay, I'm using plate solving. How does plate solving work? What do I need to do there? You just basically say, go to this target, it will slew to that target, and if it's not quite lined up, it will plate solve and work out where it actually then needs to make the adjustments to move to the target that you said to go to. That's fantastic. Finally, I've already kind of mentioned this, but the image planning I think is a killer feature, certainly from my perspective. It's enabled me to do things like setting up multiple targets throughout the night, switching filters, being able to refocus when changing filters and things like that. When I'm imaging in between a small window of the sun sky in between two trees, I can work out, okay, it's the target's moved to one particular location, I need to stop imaging that, and then I can then slew to another target. That's really fantastic. And it's also being able to use the Sky Atlas to make sure that things are framed up nicely. And then that's integrated with the image planner. So you've got your image plan. You can either tap on detail to go into the detail of the plan and see how many frames you're taking, which filters, which length exposure. But then you can also tap on Sky Atlas and it will take you to or preview where you're going to be shooting in the night sky, show you the framing and everything, which I think is really nice bit of integration now, and I love that feature. So onto the cons now. A definite con of the earlier versions of the ASIAIR, and that would be the plasticky variant, which was came in a little white plastic box, and then the ASIAIR Pro. They had sort of terrible Wi-Fi issues at the end of the day. You could only really use it if you were literally stood right next to it, and I've got an ASIAIR Pro as well as the Plus, and even stood next to the Pro sometimes the Wi-Fi drops out. A bit of a pain. You can work around it by putting in your own extender, and you basically can plug it into, you can get some that plug into the power output of the ASIAIR, and also then into the Ethernet port, and then just use and connect to that particular Wi-Fi. You can tell that ZWO realised this was a bit of a problem and people were complaining, so they released a Plus which came with an external antenna. I've put an aftermarket one on here that makes it even more, makes the signal strength even stronger, and the ASIAIR Mini, which is a later device, works in the same way as well. So that's it's a con, but they've looked at the feedback from users and they've fixed it. I mentioned regular updates as a pro. The downside of this is in the rare instance where those updates cause some kind of breaking feature, there's no rollback mechanism. So because it's tied to the version of the app that you actually have on your phone or your tablet, once you've upgraded the ASIAIR device, you can't really go back to the previous version of the app because you can't get that on your tablet anymore. One way that you could work around this would be to turn off automatic updates on your device and then only choose when you actually want to take those updates. And yeah, you can sort of look at the boards and see if people have had issues and see if it's a safe update. To be fair, I've only ever heard of one incident where it's been a particular problem. I've used beta releases of the ASIAIR software and not had any particular problem with them as well, but it does happen. And that would be a pain if you got your first clear sky in 4 weeks and you find that it doesn't work. That would be a bit annoying. So the next one will be limited compatibility. Mentioned this already in terms of the cameras that it does support. So it supports Canon, it supports Nikon SLRs. It now actually supports Sony SLRs with the latest release. I think it was 2.1. And they only support the ZWO dedicated Astro photography cameras. So if you've got anything else from, I don't know, Altair Astro or Explore Scientific and various other manufacturers out there, they won't work with this device. So if you have those cameras, you're either going to have to sell those cameras and buy ZWO ones or just not use the device. So one final point on cost. So the ASIAIR Plus devices at the moment retail for around about £299 or $299 in the US, which could be quite expensive in terms of an additional outlay just on an imaging computer. If you're looking at dedicated sort of imaging like mini PCs and things like that, then they're probably going to be around about that territory. or a laptop would be a lot more expensive, although you could use your laptop for image processing as well, but then you won't be able to use your laptop whilst you're imaging. So there are pros and cons even just with that as an option. I think for me personally, it's an additional cost, but it pales into insignificance with the cost of telescopes and dedicated astrophotography cameras and things like that. So yeah, it's a personal opinion again at the end of the day. There are also the ASIAIR Mini, where they've made a cut down version of the Plus device. It's got USB 2 rather than USB 3 ports, and so yeah, you're making a bit of a trade-off there. Wouldn't necessarily be useful for planetary photography, but if you're doing deep sky objects, then maybe that's the device to look at. So to make this video as fair as possible, I thought I should put some pros and cons around the APT software as well. And what I'll try and do is put this all in a table, so hopefully you'll be able to see on screen the differences between those two pieces of software, and you can make up your own mind as to what is most appropriate for yourself. So the first point from an APT perspective, I would say, is the wide compatibility perspective. A definite pro if you're using non-ZWO devices. At the end of the day, if you've got some hardware that has ASCOM supported drivers for it, then you'll be able to use that with APT. So that's definitely a good plus point. I would say that APT is relatively cost effective as well. I think when I was using it about 3 years ago, I think that the tool was free, and then there was a voluntary contribution, which I definitely paid for at the time, because I think if you are getting benefit from software, you should pay for it. So these days it seems like there's a trial version of the software that you can use, and then there's actually purchasing the license for €18.70. Yeah, definitely cost effective. That's not going to break the bank. It's certainly cheaper than £300 or $300. I'd say that APT has some really good features in terms of the live view for seeing what you're imaging, focusing aids and things like that. You've also got, with that focusing aid, you can either use Basanoff masks or you can use their focuser, where it enables you to achieve very accurate focusing, which is a really good feature. It also has sort of plate solving capabilities as well. Even though that's not actually provided natively within APT, you just download the software and integrate that into the application, and then you can use plate solving through APT itself. The final pro for APT is that they do actually provide regular updates, and those regular updates provide sort of bug fixes and feature enhancements and things like that. So finally, onto the cons of APT. I would say the first con is the learning curve required for this particular software. Yep, if you're already familiar with downloading software and installing drivers and connecting everything up and all of those sorts of things and making sure everything's working, then that's fine. But I would say that actually the learning curve to installing ASCOM and installing the drivers that you need and connecting everything up, downloading the plate solving software and making sure that APT is pointing to that software. If you're trying to do things like using Stellarium with EQ mod to be able to navigate the night sky and point the scope in the right place and all of those things, and you've got to download Stellarium, you've got to download EQ mod, you've got to get everything connected up together. It's all possible. Once you've done it, it works, it's fantastic, but you've got to get to that point in the first place. So yeah, a bit of a downside from that. It's not an integrated experience. The next con is partly related to the previous point, and it was actually also down to my own personal experience, which other people may not have had. And that was when I was using sort of plate solving software. There was two different plate solvers that you could use. One was better at sort of blind plate solving, and one was better when you were actually sort of giving it a bit more of a prompt as to where it should be plate solving. And I seemed to, for whatever reason, sort of get mixed up with things like that. And also there was another aspect where, that caused it to not work. And then there was another aspect where if you do change telescopes, and both APT and ASIAIR and anything else that uses plate solving will have similar problems here. If you change scope, you need to make sure that you tell the plate solving the different focal length, and also potentially the pixel size of the sensor as well. You need to do those things in order for it to then plate solve correctly. The problem with APT is at the time the focal length setting within APT was buried somewhere completely different to the plate solver itself. And yeah, it may again just be me, but when I was using that, there was a few times where I'd forget to update it and go, why is plate solving not working now? So I think sometimes, just having those things really obvious, that each time you set up the tool, it goes, this is your setup, isn't it? Then that would be a good thing. Creeping back to the ASIAIR, when you actually connect everything up and you go to the very first screen, when you open up the app, it will say, here's your telescope, here's your camera, here's your focal length, etc., etc. So therefore you can quickly sanity check and go, yep, that's my setup, that's right. So therefore the plate solving will work. But yeah, with APT you don't get that. So I hope you found this video useful. If you have any comments in terms of anything that I've said between these two different products, or you've got some experience with Nina and SharpCap, and you just want to share that with the community and the people watching this video, let them know your experiences, both positive and negative, then yeah, let's just create a bit of a discussion on here and on this video, and help other people enable themselves to make decisions and choices around which imaging software to actually use. Because at the end of the day, we are a community, we're there to help each other as much as is possible, because this hobby is difficult. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and clear skies.